First thing to say is that the title of this video is obviously hyperbole. That was deliberate. So I wanted to get attention to what I feel is a noticeable issue, and that is how identity politics is particularly seen within LGBT politics. And I think this is something worth discussing a little bit. Now, looking back at the history of LGBT rights, and I'm being very specific here, LGBT, I'm not going beyond that. And I won't, except for this video in which I'll be discussing beyond that. Looking at the history of LGBT rights, um, the focus has been on different groups at different times. So I would suggest from the Stonewall riots in 1969 to probably the 2000s, the big thing was gay rights. And that's still a major issue, but probably around this decade, actually, the 2010s, the whole trans rights issue has come to the fore in a similar way to where gay rights was getting more attention in the 80s. That's not to say that trans issues weren't there in the past, but definitely they've got more prominent. I think Bruce Caitlyn Jenner um, has definitely brought attention to that as an issue, and the whole debate around bathroom legislation in various American jurisdictions has brought more debate around it. There's been films like The Crying Game and Trans America has brought popular attention to trans people. Um, so I would suggest that, that has got more to the fore. Without question, there has always been a presence of LGBT people in society, going way, way back to the ancient Sparta. That goes without saying. And it's also true that there has been tensions within the LGBT community over the level of perceived discrimination. So it has been argued, for example, that gay men in some ways have got a rougher time than lesbian women because, put it this way, women have always went to the bathroom together without necessarily being homosexual. If two guys went to the bathroom together, people would automatically say, yeah, they're gay. So I suppose that's where the contention lies. But what I want to focus on is this new trend for terminology. So LGBT, L, lesbian, G, gay, B, bisexual, T, transsexual or transgender. Um, and that, from what I understand, doesn't include transvestite, which could be actually a heterosexual person who just likes to dress up for fun on a certain day. I've also heard it said GLBT to put gay men ahead and so on. This is what I was talking about, internal disputes. But LGBT is the most commonly used terminology. But recently, and I mean very recently, like the past probably 5 years, there has been more terms added to this. Q. I didn't know what this meant, so I asked someone. They said it means questioning. Someone else says it means queer. Then you have Q plus, just to include all the other pronouns. But then you get LGBTQI plus, and there's others. And it does seem to be a never-ending situation where there's simply more and more pronouns being added to this. Now, this is problematic for a few reasons. Firstly, for simple practical reasons, it's a mouthful. It's not that easy to say. LGBT isn't too difficult, but when you start saying LGBTQ plus, it's a mouthful. It's difficult to say. So for plain practical reasons, in terms of communication, it's making things a bit more difficult because it's just making the the actual pronunciation of it more difficult. So from a purely practical point of view, that's a problem. But more importantly, is the issue of, well, to what extent does this actually exist as a real diagnosed phenomenon? Now, there's being straightforward women who are attracted to other women, gay men who are attracted to other men, bisexual people who are attracted to um, both genders, and transgender people who identify as who believe they were born in the wrong body and they've either had the hormone surgery and so on. And that itself is something that is hotly debated over, to what extent someone could describe themselves as a woman and a man and so on. But then when you get into the realm of pangender and demi-queer, and honestly, I've lost track. And this isn't to be flippant or crass about it. It really is becoming a situation that, well, where does this end? I mean, under this logic that any sort of new terminology that is added by lobby groups, then where do you draw a limit? Because in theory, there is no limit. Someone could say they feel that they're not male and not female and they're an alien. Is that going to be added? And that's not even an exaggeration. There was a guy somewhere in the States who tried to get surgery to be classed as an alien, to be genderless, to be actually an alien. Um, I find it concerning because what this is delving into is a situation whereby feelings are being put ahead of science. And again, this is something that will be hotly disputed by the LGBT lobby. But even within the LGBT lobby, there is contentions within this. For example, lesbian women may resent a trans woman going to a woman's conference. Or put it this way, a trans woman being a representative, self designated or designated through being voted to that position, a representative of women when they were not born biologically female, when they were born with a penis. Then McCluskey, the head of the Unite Union, who's not someone I usually agree with, but he recently mentioned the bullying tactics of the LGBT lobby on these sort of issues. And for once, I agree with him. I think he makes a point there because, particularly within the Labour Party, there has been a tendency for trans women to kind of demand that they are treated exactly as women, as legally defined women. And that then gets into issues of, well, do you then get a trans person representing the Labour women and so on? This is where it gets very contentious. Now, that is an important issue because I assume that Labour women would be bringing up things like so-called period poverty, where women are paying more for sanitary products and so on. Now, surely only someone who's biologically female can really understand that and speak up for it. Men can maybe be sympathetic, but that's an area where science surely matters more than how people define themselves. I mean, I've long been skeptical that someone can simply have an operation. Well, not simply; it's complicated, but they can have an operation and then they are a woman. What I've always said is I respect trans rights insofar as I respect someone who strongly believes that they're in the wrong body to identify themselves as they want. And out of a matter of politeness, I'm not going to go to a trans woman and say, "Oh, you're a dude." I'm not going to do that. And I'm absolutely needless to say, I would speak out against bullying of trans people and hate crimes and that sort of thing. There are parts of the world where transgender people have been brutally murdered. That's wrong. But and this is kind of similar to the video I made before on the pride issue. When you're threatening legislation, when you're threatening to criminalize people over using the wrong pronouns, that's where it starts to get contentious. And I honestly think there are a lot of millennial students out there, and it has to be said it is predominantly millennials. They don't represent all us millennials, but they are predominantly millennials, and they're so intensely politically correct and so intensely interested in virtue signaling that they will spend time literally debating over what terms are the most sensitive and what terms. And this is a problem because, like I say, there are no limits to it. There are absolutely no limits to it. And if If governments start pandering to this, we're going to have a situation whereby every official documentation is going to have LGBTQ plus, etc., etc., etc. Otherwise, they're going to be accused of being queer bigoted, okay, queer phobic, or questioning phobic. I mean, this is the point. It's ridiculous. I'm just going to say it outright. I think this is getting absurd. And I think it needs to be challenged because if you don't challenge it, there are going to be legal repercussions. That's where, it would be one thing if it was just a bit strange for those of us who think it's absurd. But where it is a problem is when you start bringing legalities into it. And that's what the LGBT lobby need to understand. It's fine playing the victim, but when you start threatening legalities, then you're actually behaving as the controller. You're behaving in a totalitarian manner when you're threatening to have a situation where other people are prosecuted for using the wrong pronouns. I've no problem with someone being frustrated and say, look, I don't like to be called male, so please respect me and call me by my preferred pronoun. And I think people should out of politeness. But it becomes a different matter when you're saying, I want this person to be arrested and charged with a hate crime because they may have inadvertently used the wrong pronoun. And we have seen tendencies in that direction. So I think that to me is concerning. Um, so on principle, I am not going to use LGBT plus. I'm drawing the line at LGBT because I recognize those four are real things. There are gay men, there are lesbian women, there are bisexual people, and there are transgender people. Beyond that, I believe it really is down to people's feelings. And if we start pandering terminology to people's feelings, then if you really take it to its extreme, then you'd have no political debates. Because if you really get down to feelings, then a conservative couldn't have a disagreement with a socialist because they might offend them. A socialist couldn't disagree with a liberal because they might offend them, and so on. Because I really think a lot of these 30 odd genders that are coming in really are just down to millennials having too much time on their hands. That's how I feel about it. I've nothing against, being respectful of people and, certainly not being flippant about it and, bullying people or anything like that. But we are getting into an absolutely absurd situation. And if people don't speak out at a time when we are still able to do so, because in the near future, even what I'm saying here, I could be committing a hate crime simply for saying this. That is something that is deeply concerning. And as it stands, probably nothing's going to happen to me. But in the near future, that could be the situation where even having a dissenting point of view will get you into hot water, will get you charged with a hate crime. It's one thing if people just don't like what you're saying, but when it actually comes to legislation, that's another matter. So I hope I've given people something to think about here. My own feeling is anything beyond that T, it's made up. It's millennials having too much time on their hands, and frankly, and I'm not, I'm a millennial, but unfortunately, this is largely. Then again, often it's middle-aged professors who are of neo-Marxist persuasion and who tend to brainwash young students into thinking this way. It's when you get to a situation where science is secondary to feelings, that's really a problem. Um, and yeah, I hope I've given people something to think about. You don't have to agree with me, but if you disagree with me, what I would say is, are you really going to use every single letter that is an acronym for something every time you're talking about it? Because inevitably you're going to mess up. You're going to inadvertently leave out one of those letters, then offend pangender people or demi-fluid people or demi-queer or whatever the other 30 odd genders are. That's ridiculous. And I refuse personally to do that. I'm not going to do it. LGBT, that's where I draw the line. I don't go beyond that T because I think beyond that is ridiculous. Questioning, for example. Well, most people question when they're growing up, when they're hitting puberty. Then most of us are in that Q category. So it's ridiculous. Let me know your thoughts.